beneath us. And it's really amazing books. Paul is the author, as I said, of The End of Night, Searching for Natural Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light, published in North America by Little Brown, and in the UK and around the world by Fourth Estate Harper and Collins. This book was shortlisted for the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. He is also the author of The Ground Beneath Us, From the Oldest Cities to the Last Wilderness, What Dirt Tells Us All About Who We Are, published by Little Brown. And this book is really near and dear to my heart because I'm a recovering soil scientist, about 10 years removed from that field. So that one really hit me. Paul is also the editor of the forthcoming Solastalgia, an anthology of emotion in a disappearing world. And he's also the author of children's book, picture book, What If Night, and author of the coffee table book, To Know a Starry Night. Paul is a native Minnesotan. Paul grew up exploring the forest and watching the stars near a lake in the northern part of the state. He has lived and taught in New Mexico, Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Virginia, and is now an associate professor of English and environmental studies at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I invited Paul here because Paul and I had a chance to go down to Southeast Ohio during his research for The Ground Beneath Us a couple years back, pre-COVID, so a totally different world. And I was really struck when Paul and I were driving back up to Cleveland that day, hearing Paul tell me that what he saw that day struck him as occupied territory. And it was the first time I had really ever thought about something I had been looking at for about 4 or 5 years at that point, at least weekly, or at least several times a week. So that way of looking at what I've been looking at for so long really resonated with me, and I'm really thankful that he included his experience in Southeast Ohio on The Ground Beneath Us. So with that, I'll hand it over to Paul. Paul, thank you for being here, and I hope you all enjoyed Paul's talk. And after that, we'll have a little Q&A and we'll go from there. Thanks, Paul.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here, and really nice in a certain way to be returned to Ohio. I remember that trip well with Ted, and it definitely left an impression on me, and I was happy to include that in The Ground Beneath Us. Today, what I wanted to do was just to share with you some images from both books, just as a way of kind of introducing the works, and maybe read a couple paragraphs from each book to give you a flavor of the writing there, and then leave plenty of time for questions, whatever questions you have. There's lots we can talk about. So I'm going to share my screen here. Does that look good? Everybody can see that? Okay. So a lot of times people say, how did you come to write the books that you write? And I always like to say that it started with being a little kid and being able to have a cabin in northern Minnesota, and growing up with an image of a night that looked like this, a night sky that looked like this, pine trees and the stars at night. I loved going out under the big moon and swimming in the water, listening to the loons and wolves, the crickets, all the different sounds. And all my life, I've loved taking the canoe out into the lake and lying under the stars on nights like this. That kind of ongoing firsthand childhood experience, childhood up through all my life really, mixed with some once-in-a-lifetime experiences, led me to write this book, The End of Night. And I think actually I'll read a passage that shares one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So this is from The End of Night. The most beautiful starry night I've ever seen was more than 30 years ago, when I was backpacking through Europe as an 18-year-old high school graduate. I had traveled south from Spain into Morocco, and from there south to the Atlas Mountains at the edge of the Sahara, to a place that when I look on a map, I can no longer find. One night in a youth hostel that was more like a stable, I woke and walked out into a snowstorm. But it wasn't the snow I was used to in Minnesota or anywhere else I'd been. Standing bare chest a cool night, wearing flip-flops and shorts, I let a storm of stars swirl around me. I remember no light pollution. Heck, I remember no lights, but I remember the light around me, the sense of being lit by starlights, and that I could see the ground to which the stars seemed to be floating down. I saw the sky that night in 3 dimensions. The sky had depth, some stars seemingly close and some much farther away. The Milky Way, so well defined, it had what astronomers call structure, that sense of its twisting depths. I remember stars from one horizon to the other, stars stranger in their numbers than the wooden cart full of severed goat heads I saw that morning, making a night sky so plush it still seems like a dream. So much was right about that night. It was a time of my life when I was every day experiencing something new. I felt open to everything as though I were made of clay and the world was imprinting upon me its breathtaking beauty. Standing nearly naked under that Moroccan sky, skin against the air, the dark, the stars, the night pressed its impression and my lifelong connection was sealed. So that kind of firsthand experience of a real night sky, real darkness is, we've largely lost that. One of the most astounding estimates I found when I was researching the book is that a kid born in the US today, 8 out of 10 kids born in the USA today will never live where they can see the Milky Way. It's just astounding to imagine that. And the cause, of course, is artificial light. I always like to say we're going to have artificial light. We like light at night. It's a miracle in so many ways. It's useful, helpful. The question is, how will we use it? How much will we use of it? And where will we use it? So unfortunately, a lot of what we call light pollution is the overuse and misuse of artificial light at night. So a light like this that's glaring in all directions, blinding you, that kind of thing. Another example of what we think of as light pollution is something called light trespass here, where you have the building on one side lighting up the other house here, and folks have hung curtains in their windows to block that light so they can sleep. What I think a lot of people don't really understand is the true extent of light pollution. Excuse me. That in fact, it still gets dark at night, and it gets darker in some places than others. But what astronomers have found is that it no longer gets naturally dark in most places. This is a map of Western Europe and North Africa that astronomers have put together to show the true extent. So the black area out in the oceans is what we might call natural darkness. All the lit up areas are the various levels of light in Europe, and you can see from the map that there just aren't any black or naturally dark areas left in Western Europe, for example. The map of the US looks really quite similar. Excuse me. And what they did, they had data in 1997, and they estimated backwards and they estimated forwards to show us where we've come from and where we're headed. And keep in mind, this was 25 years ago when they did these maps. And in fact, when you look at the maps of the US today, their updated maps, it looks almost exactly like what they predicted for 2025. Pretty astounding. I'm guessing there are folks in the audience who remember the late 50s, certainly the mid 70s, when the night was a different place and the sky was a different view. Lots of costs to light pollution. I go through them in the book. Monetary costs, all that light is wasted, all the energy costs, the carbon emissions, all wasted. But the one cost that really impacts me, that I care about the most, is the cost to our fellow creatures, the environmental costs, as we say. There are so many nocturnal creatures, as you see here, and then even more crepuscular creatures, animals, birds, insects, amphibians that use the hours of dawn and dusk, the hours around dawn of dusk to mate, feed, migrate, and all that. Those folks, those creatures are really impacted by artificial light. Some of the most recent science is showing the impact to insects is tremendous from artificial light at night. And I'm guessing several of you have heard about the deep drops in insect populations especially pollinating insects and the possible connections and ramifications of that loss of those creatures. There are also really intangible costs, and I spend a lot of time in the book talking about the importance of darkness, the importance of night for us, create artistically, spiritually. I always love showing this image because it's such a good image of a single human being looking up at the sky. And I like to say that we've taken what was once one of the most common human experiences, which is walking out your door at night and coming face to face with the universe. And we've made it one of the most rare of human experiences. Again, when we think about the costs of that, we can think about the cost to our spiritual life, the cost to our creative life. I think about, someone like Van Gogh painting his world famous Starry Night in 1888 in the south of France, and the night sky that he had to paint, and the night sky, for example, that all the young Van Goghs out there right now don't have to paint. I have a friend at an observatory in Texas who wanted to update Starry Night for the modern age, what Van Gogh might have painted if he were alive today, and there's his updated version. The question that often arises, though, is, don't we need all this light for safety and security? And the truth of the matter is that lighting at night is really a complex issue that we too often reduce to a simplistic light is good, dark is bad, therefore more light is better kind of thing. And I like to show a couple images. It's the same view, taken from the same spot. And the only difference is in the first image here, you see what we see so often and in so many places around us, which is an unshielded light. It's shining in all directions. It's lighting up the photographer. It's shining into the sky. The next image is the same image. The only difference is that the photographer hold his hand up to shield the light down to the ground. And when he does that, then we can see the bad guy standing. So I'll go back. I like to go back. You can see him here in the fence. But when our lights are too bright at night, when they're unshielded like this, they cast shadows where the bad guys can hide. They restrict our pupils, make it harder for us to see. And I think worst of all, they give the illusion of safety. We're so used to the idea that bright lights mean safety that and it really isn't often the case. There he is. So handy little graphic here. Just when we don't shield our lights, we lose the stars. As we shield the lights, we bring back the stars, and we find the bad guy under the light. So that's the end of night. There's much more to talk about. I'm happy to answer questions about that when we get to the end. But when I finished writing The End of Night and it came out, and I was thinking about what book to write next, I was thinking about connections, disconnections. Where did I want to go? What issues did I want to write about? It was also at the time that my beloved dog, Luna, who'd been with me for 15 years, was at the end of her life. And I made the decision. I was working in Virginia at the time, in Harrisonburg at James Madison University. And this is a view from our cabin in northern Minnesota. I made the decision that I wanted her to be at the cabin. And so we said goodbye here at the cabin, and she's buried off to the left of the house here. And it really had a profound impact on me when I thought about why it was important that she be in the ground next to the place that's the most important place to me in the world. Got me thinking about the ground. And pretty quickly after that, I heard this astounding statistic that Americans spend 95% of their time inside. So this is again pre-COVID, it's probably mostly at home now, but at work, in the car, at home. And then I thought, even when we walk outside, most of us walk on pavement, right? So it represented this literal separation from the grounds that give us our water, our food, our energy, and our spirit. and the book idea was born. So it set me on a journey to um, learn a lot about soil. Ted, please don't ask me questions about soil science, though. That was 5 or 6 years ago. An amazing, I mean, soil is, I will never lose my fascination and respect for soil. Just unbelievable. I got to go to London and go down into the holes in the center of London where they were creating a new train line beneath the city and digging up medieval graveyards, for example. I got to go to Iowa and to talk about soil. And I always get a kick out of this image because the photographer, the farmer who was with me, he was showing me this field of oats, and I was so fascinated. And I said, is it okay if I walk into them? Just like the suburban kid who wasn't sure what he could do and couldn't do. And he said, of course, right? So we were walking there, I'll take your picture. Thinking about the food the ground gives us, thinking about the value of the ground for wildlife. This is a shot from of the sandhill cranes in Nebraska. And I write about being there at the time. The hundreds of thousands of cranes come through in March on their annual migration. Oops. So that all became this book eventually, The Ground Beneath Us, and included that trip to southeastern Ohio with Ted that I really appreciated. Let me just read a couple paragraphs. I'm conscious of time here, but I want to just read a few last. So in the trip to Ohio with Ted, we go down, and Ted can tell you exactly where we went. And I was just astounded by what I saw there. And as Ted mentioned before, my impression was, as I said, I feel like I'm visiting a country where a foreign force from a land of white pickups and only men, stained and unshaven, has come with its heavy machinery to do as it pleases. When I get back home to Minneapolis after the trip, I have lunch with a friend, and he says to me, what more can you say about fracking that hasn't already been said? And I say, in many ways, it's true. Anyone with an internet connection can find plenty of statistics and articles claiming both bonanza and doom. But what you can only feel by going to where fracking is happening is what it feels like on the ground. There are no unsacred places, writes Wendell Berry, only sacred and desecrated places. I admit that what I experienced in Ohio brought the word desecration to mind, but only in the loose sense in which we use the term: severely damaged, wiped out, ruined. In fact, of course, the actual definition refers to treating, quote, a sacred place or thing with violent disrespect. The vital meaning of the word, the reason it's more powerful than the others, is this specific reference to the sacred. Soon after I leave the state, the Ohio legislature, while working on a bill to speed up the permitting process for fracking, agrees to hold off opening the state parks to gas and oil exploration. It turns out that state forests are already open to fracking, as are state wildlife areas. And the sense I get is that in time, even the parks will be fair game, that with its friends in government and industry and enough voters either tuned out or benefiting from the current situation, this occupation will spread whenever and wherever it desires. I think about the parks and forests and wildlife areas near my home, what I would do if this occupying force I saw in Ohio threatened my lakes and loons and rivers. I'd like to think I would chain myself to tanker truck tires, pour sugar in pickup gas tanks, that I would monkey wrench pump jacks and burn down man camps and in every possible way join the resistance. But resistance against whom? Where does this occupation start? When does it end? Faced with the desecration of the grounds on which we base our lives, what would any of us do? I took this notion of the sacred and desecration north to Alaska, and I end the book by visiting a couple places that seem, well, they are really far apart, literally, but for me, they both spoke of the sacred. The first was southwest Alaska here, the tundra, being out there where when you stand there, you feel like you're walking through somebody's flower garden, kind of rooting their, you're stepping on berries and sinking down into the moss. It was remarkable to be out there. And then the other place was in Southeast Poland at the Nazi death camp of Treblinka, which, if anybody has been there, it's really hard to put into words. There's, unlike Auschwitz and other camps, there are no buildings left there. There's only this open space with some memorials like there. So it feels in some ways like a park, but the whole time you're there, you're thinking 900,000 people were murdered here in the course of about a year and a half. So thinking about what does sacred ground became a really important part near the end of the book for me. I'll end with just a couple of thoughts on what I'm doing now. After The Ground Beneath Us came out, my daughter was born. She's almost 4 now, so she doesn't look like this anymore. But it really changed my life in a way that I didn't expect. I'm sure many of you know this feeling as parents. It's you don't know how it feels until you actually experience it. We got her reading the classics right away. When I think of what to do next, I always think about her pointing me toward the future, where I really hope she gets to grow up and experience a night sky like I did, and all the beauties of the earth that I've gotten to know. So I will end my screen share there. And Ted, I'm happy to move on to questions if you like.
Sure. Linda, Ann, are there any, or do you want me to lead it off? Or
I think Linda's going to take care of this, and people who have questions, you can put them in the chat. I know Ted has some questions too, so we'll see what happens.
I'm happy to yield the floor if there's questions coming from the floor.
I do not see any questions in chat at this moment, but I don't think we're just now inviting people. So
Yeah.
So we've got some time right now. If anybody would like to hear, additional information that Paul wants to, has to share, if anybody wants to go into more depth, then please just drop your questions in chat. We'll read them out loud. I don't see anyone right now with questions, but Ted, if you want to start us off, I think that would be fine.
Yeah. Lots of questions. First, Paul, you mentioned Aldo Leopold a lot in your books. He is a hero of mine. And I feel like if you didn't grow up where you grew up or have that kind of deep environmental history, you might not know who he is. It's kind of a non sequitur, but could you comment on why he's so important to you? And just generally.
Yeah, Leopold is, I definitely think of him as a hero of mine. Grew up in Iowa and went to Yale Forestry School and got his first job in Arizona before it was even officially a state in the first part of the 20th century. And later became the world's first professor of wildlife management at UW-Madison, and lived the rest of his life there. I wrote this world famous book, A Sand County Almanac. And for me, I respect so much of his ability to write about the scientific and ecological concepts that he was forming and learning at the time, but write about them in a way that anybody can read and understand. So he's famous for, I was just reading this fairly recently, famous for a chapter called Thinking Like a Mountain, where he talks about his experience of being in Arizona and seeing a wolf, and the first thing he jumped up and started shooting it without even thinking about it. In those days, he thought that's what you do when you see a wolf. And the piece goes on to talk about how he's learned that, the value of predators, and it's all about the balance of nature and ecology, and everything is connected to everything else, but so powerful. And in the last few years, especially, I think the thing that he wrote that has meant the most to me is a passage where he writes about once you gain an ecological education, you live alone in a world of wounds. Yeah. And just that idea that once you start seeing what's happening to the planet, it can feel painful in a lot of ways, and it also can feel really lonely because it seems like we're surrounded by folks who either don't know or don't want to know, or both.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's amazing. I visited his shack in Baraboo, and like you're talking about the ghosts of past. When I was just standing at the shack, I mean, I was getting killed by mosquitoes, but other than that, it was, you felt like you could feel him there. It felt great.
I
So
agree. Yep.
yeah.
I agree.
We have a couple questions. The first one is, you talk about your experience of fracking in Ohio as an experience of hell and explore the history of that concept. Could you share another paragraph or two? You probably see that in the chat too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I don't have it dialed right up though. Let's see. While I'm looking for that, I think I can answer the question about
The Observatory Park. Okay. Oh, which one were you looking at?
Light
the,
pollution.
yeah, about light pollution.
Okay.
Yeah, we can actually do a lot about light pollution, and it starts at the individual level. We can, at our homes, we can buy fixtures that are what they call dark sky friendly or night sky friendly. Basically, they're shielded. At the local level, we can have lighting ordinances which dictate the types of streetlights that we might have. At the state level, there's similar kinds of ordinances. Lighting changes all the time, and so there are always opportunities to make a difference when the lighting when lights are replaced, for example.
Yeah.
Or new technology comes along. One of the best resources, if you're interested, is the International Dark Sky Association, which is at darksky.org. And there's a lot of information there. And there are so many issues that seem so overwhelming. Climate change, obviously, that when it comes to light pollution, yeah, it's a big problem, but we have all the tools we need to deal with light pollution. It starts with education and just helping people see the light when it comes to that issue.
Yeah, just working time so you can find those chapters. Ron brought up too. The one thing I was going to say about light pollution, Louise mentioned the migratory birds, which you talk a lot about, whether it's the cranes and all sorts of other things. I was struck by the Luxor Hotel example you gave in Las Vegas, and that beam of light that's like calling out Batman from thousands of miles away, and the shot that you have of the moss and all that stuff. But as far as the answer to Ron's question is concerned, where exactly did you visit? So we were in Noble and Guernsey counties with a couple that we know pretty well, Carrie and Jeff Bond, who live right on Seneca Lake. Some of you might have heard of Carrie and Jeff. I know Vanessa Pesic is on here. She knows Carrie and Jeff. They ended up being unitized, so they were going to not drill on their property, but they ended up drilling all around their property, so they had to take the bill. And what did we see? We saw. I remember we went and looked at the Crum compressor station up the hill from them, which was flaring. You mentioned that in your book, and all sorts of other stuff. All the infrastructure that you could think of is so dense in that area. So yeah, Noble and Guernsey County.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think I can read a couple quick paragraphs. So in the chapter in Appalachia, I had some fun with looking back at definitions of hell and all the different, descriptions of hell and various cultures and that kind of thing. But I also had a serious point, of course, and this is what I would say. I doubt that many of us truly believe that deep in the fiery bowels of earth, countless humans endlessly toil amid fiery furnaces, whipped to work by goat horn devils. But I wonder if whether we actually believe that hell is down or that heaven is up almost doesn't matter, because the metaphor is so ingrained in American culture. That hell is in the ground tells us earth can be used however we like. That heaven is in the sky tells us paradise is somewhere else. As the Mormon pamphlet I once received put it, the earth is not our home. Barring a nuclear holocaust or a world in which giant rabbits devour us for supper, that was one of the crazy images of hell that I'd referenced before. A far more likely scenario for hell on Earth has to do with altering the planet through our way of life. The effects of climate change are becoming apparent around the globe, and many say of known fossil fuel reserves that we must leave it in the ground to avoid catastrophe. But energy companies are spending billions every year to find more, and governments around the world are spending billions more to subsidize their use. Biologist and author Sandra Steingraber calls the issue of whether to continue fracking for oil and gas, quote, the question of our time, unquote. But in Appalachia, as elsewhere, we continue to pull dead ancient life from the ground, sending it around the world, setting it aflame.
That's awesome. You know, we have a couple other questions. This is the last one, and I mean, the most recent one that was posted, and this was, how does light pollution affect our health directly and evolutionarily? Evolutionary, in an evolutionary way.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, what the science is relatively recent, but the impacts to human physical health are include disrupting our sleep, and sleep being tied to every major disease that we're dealing with: cancer, diabetes, depression, obesity. I had a guy at Harvard in the sleep area there tell me that our understanding of sleep and sleep disorders is where our understanding of cigarettes were in the 1950s. So we are understanding that it's serious. We don't know, we don't have all the details yet. It disrupts our circadian rhythms, and it disrupts the production of melatonin in our bodies. And it's been tied to, the lack of melatonin in our blood has been tied to cancers of prostate and breast and that kind of thing. So there are real links to being exposed to light at night. The World Health Organization considers working the night shift a probable carcinogen, for example. In terms of evolutionarily, what my understanding is that there hasn't been time to impact us in that way. One of the effects that people are really concerned about is the impact to our eyes and our vision of staring into screens for hours and hours and hours on end, especially at night, looking at all that blue light. But when I've asked scientists about that, they said, we just haven't had time to, have those kind of evolutionary changes, which is, it's good in a way, right? We can, if we turn out the light, maybe the changes aren't so lasting. So.
In your book about the ground beneath us, you talk about the weight of the cement and the damage that the cement and concrete, is doing environmentally. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about the damage done by overpopulated cities versus the damage done by suburban sprawl, and cutting up all that little bit of land that we have left.
Yeah, sprawl is a huge problem, as I'm sure many of you know, and just the fact that so much of that sprawl is covering open space, deep, rich soil, wildlife habitat. So we pave over so much ground that is alive and that fuels life on Earth. And once you pave over a place, it's nearly impossible to bring it back. So human population growth is a big issue for sure. But there are a lot of good things happening when people are living in cities a little bit more efficiently and compactly than, let's say, just sprawling all over the place. Almost different issues, but both with big ramifications.
Yeah. All right. So, I've noticed in the past, 2 years with this pandemic, there seems to be a huge increase in the number of people that are hiking. Hiking clubs are just like in a boom state right now, which I think is fantastic. And you talk about that, how natural walking is to us and what a wonderful pace that is and what a wonderful, view that gives us of the land. So I wondered if you had anything that, that you wanted, like, how could we encourage people to do that more and take a closer look at, the land and the ground that we're ignoring so much?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing from a lot of areas, a lot of different areas in society that people want to get out, and I agree with you that that's what I'm hearing as well. I think about it, in terms of, for example, the night and darkness, and the how invaluable it is to bring people out at night, and have them look at the moon or Saturn, or through a telescope. And it's awe-inspiring. We're doing in the Twin Cities here, we've started a branch of the International Dark Sky Association, and every month we have full moon hikes, full moon walks, at a local nature center. And it's not, as I showed the map of Europe there, the North America is the same. It's not, on a scale of 1 to 9 that astronomers use, Minneapolis, like Cleveland, is going to be like 8 or 9. It's one of the brightest. The cities are the brightest areas. So it's not dark, but it's to get people out, even in these nature centers at night, and just make them understand that night is a beautiful, inviting place in, obviously not everywhere, but we have this notion, I think, that, night is scary everywhere. And it's like, actually, it's really beautiful if you get out. So lots of opportunity to bring people out. And when I say people, I especially mean kids, and let them have one of those firsthand experiences like I talked about.
Yeah. So there's a question, someone who's wondering if you've seen the Observatory Park in Ohio, when in Geauga County, when you were here. Were you able to, I don't know if that was before the Observatory Park was built or established, or if you had a chance to see that?
I did not know.
Okay, well, then I think that the message there is you should go see it. Again, it's not a planetarium, so it's actually out there in the sky. Another question is that we have, I'm sorry, I'm looking here. About migratory birds. Is there any movement to turn off city lights during migratory weeks?
Yeah, there are. It is a little city by city, unfortunately. So I don't know, in your area what's happening. There is a movement here in the Twin Cities, a lights out program is what they call it. And in a number of cities, there are those kinds of campaigns. I mean, folks may not know, more than 400 species of birds migrate at night in North America. It is hugely important for them, and that our lights at night have real impacts on them, especially in a place like the Twin Cities here, where we're right in a flyway. So the birds come down the Mississippi, and a lot of the birds that you hear about that run into windows during the day were drawn into those urban areas by lights at night, for example. So it's a real issue. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. So the next question is about satellites. And I'm just going to read, what do you think about the massive launch of satellites to implement technologies like 5G communication? And what is this doing to the night sky?
I'm really glad to have that question from Ron. It is a massively disheartening issue, actually. When I wrote the book 10 years ago, it wasn't an issue. And now within the last maybe 2 years, even, it's emerged. And what's happening is that these Starlink, is it, I'm forgetting Elon Musk's company, and other companies are launching these satellites into the sky, into low Earth orbit. And right now we're at about 5,000 of these things, and they're already showing up. Some of you may have seen them. They're showing up in the sky, reflecting the light of the sun, like we're used to seeing 1 or 2 satellites. Estimates are that within 10 years, there will be 100,000 of these in the night sky. So going from 5,000 to 100,000. And when I spoke to an astronomer in Saskatchewan a couple of weeks ago, who's really concerned about this, she said, you'll walk out at night and you'll see 200 satellites in the sky. whereas now you might just see one occasionally. It really does, it's hard to know exactly what it's going to be like, but it has huge implications for not only astronomy and folks who are studying the stars, but for the rest of us who just like to walk out and come face to face with the universe.
There's a question here more about the ground than about the light, and that is the no-till farming, and how does this fit into getting closer to the ground and being more aware of it and more respectful of the soil? And the question is specifically, what are the barriers to the expansion of this?
I'm not an expert on this. I wouldn't claim to be, but what I know of it is that barriers, there are several. Number one is just education, getting people to understand that this is something that would be wise to do. And then probably the biggest one I would imagine is economics, that the system has been set up in a certain way that no-till farming doesn't immediately pay as well as doing it the way that folks have been doing it for the last few decades. But as I said, I wouldn't want to be quoted necessarily on that. It's been a while since I was in Iowa standing in that field of oats.
If I could just jump in on that issue, there was a recent article in the New York Times that spotlighted the fact that at least a small minority, if not a larger than small minority of farmers, don't like no-till farming because it ends up producing more weeds and they have to use more herbicides to control the weeds. So you're sort of caught in a vicious circle.
Yeah.
The last question I think that we wanted to look at was, what are your thoughts about why people are so prone to over-light things, overuse lights? Why is this happening? Why are we overlighting?
Yeah, I think there's some real basic reasons. One is that we're just afraid of the dark. And I mean that, literally and metaphorically, this culture does not have a respect for natural darkness and the fact that darkness is a part of the natural world and a part of a natural life. A lot of us would claim to not be afraid of the dark. And then when we come to your house, it'll all be lit up. I've seen it time and time again. Obviously, there are reasons for lighting. Light at night is good, and we're going to have it. It's just how will we use it and where. The other thing, the other basic thing is just that idea of light is good and dark is bad. And so more light is better. And it's hard to help people, as I said, see the light about the issue and understand that sometimes light is good and sometimes darkness is good. And we need both for a healthy life. If I may, there was a question that I could tie this into earlier from about astronomy and education. And I'm not surprised. Douglas Fowler says, I've become saddened by the way planetariums have largely failed in education about light pollution. And I've been stunned. I've been stunned by that. And I think education has a huge part of it too. There are just so many messages telling us that darkness is a scary night is scary, darkness is scary. And we really have so many people just have no idea about how beautiful it can be and what a real night sky looks like and what we're missing out on. So I agree with the question that, and I hope that the book helps add some of that inspiration and education that will maybe change the tide.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I think,
So much.
yeah.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate that. And thanks to all our participants here. In a few minutes, we're going to move on to our book drawing. But before we do that, we have a few announcements to make here at the end of our program. So I'm going to share the screen again. And Reverend John Elder, if you're here, could you tell us about this upcoming event?
I'll be glad to. Next Saturday, there's going to be a program featuring the world-renowned environmentalist, Dr. David Orr. This is co-sponsored by the Living Waters Association of the United Church of Christ and the Community Life Collaborative. It's Saturday, March 12th from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And it's a hybrid. You can either come and physically be part of it at the First Church in Oberlin, 106 North Main Street, or you can join by Zoom. Our speaker, Dr. David Orr, is tackling the question, what do faith and democracy have to do with environmental justice? We'll hear from Professor Orr about the compounding issues of climate change and discuss the work of faith communities with Reverend David Hill and the Green Team of the First Church in Oberlin. And the program will also include a brief video on the sustainability actions that have been taken by First Church and its Pay It Forward program to help other congregations achieve their sustainability goals. The slide shows you the website where you can register, www.communitylifecollaborative.org/our-nature. I hope to see lots of you there. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And Ted, you've got an announcement as well.
Oh, yeah, thanks. This Tuesday, March 8th, my colleagues and I at Frac Tracker are giving a presentation on some of the work that we've done, the value of maps, how we define data, how we compile data sets on oil and gas development through Halt to Harm. So if you're interested, it's going to be a couple of times, March 8th from 6 to 7 and March 10th from 1 to 2 p.m. So consider it if you have time.
Thank you, Ted. Our next in the series of speakers, Ted, do you want to talk about this too?
Sure. Our next speaker is Tom Haynes, author of Walking to the Sun. I worked with Tom on some of his work in North Dakota. He's going to be talking about his experiences and looking at the energy politics in North Dakota and the tensions between the push for renewables and the legacy of oil and gas in North Dakota and just kind of nationally. So he's going to be really exciting. He's a University of New Hampshire professor who did a hike from New Hampshire all the way out to North Dakota in the Bakken field. So we'll hear about that trek and some of his conclusions from that. So
thanks, Ted. Okay, and we're going to pause here. And Anne, have you got our winners of the book drawing?
I do. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We always like to pull some names and give away books from the author we're so happy to have as our speaker. So I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I don't pronounce people's names properly. Martha Wyersma, Terry McGowan, Elizabeth Aldrich, Janet Hillen, and Douglas Fowler. And if you would please put your snail mail address in the chat, because we are going to mail the book to you. It will be a real copy. And also, if you could put your email, just in case, there's a problem, we need to get a hold of you. So thanks so much and congratulations.
And tell Anne which book you wish to have.
Right, we're gonna give away End of Night and The Ground Beneath Us. So choose one of those and put that in the chat.
Okay, and you can address Anne directly in the chat. Just look for Anne Caruso and you can give her that information. One more thing we'd like to remind you about is donations. So if you enjoyed our program today, we hope you will consider making a donation to FACT. You can make your check out to FACT and mail it to FACT, Post Office Box 1235, Mentor, Ohio 44061. Or you can use our secure PayPal link at our website, www.factohio.org. Thank you. And thank you all for participating today. And we hope to see you all in June for our next speaker. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your weekend.